Summarizing. Module 1, page 37. A summary should be a short version of a longer original source. Its main goal is to present a large amount of information in a short and concise text. It includes only the most important ideas of the original text. Often, a summary will consist of a main idea as well as major supporting ideas. As a general guideline, a paragraph might be reduced to a sentence or two. An entire section of a textbook could be reduced to a single paragraph. An entire story could be condensed or summarized into a single paragraph. To summarize, you cannot simply use a thesaurus and change some of the words in a sentence. You must write the summary in your own words. It often works best to read the idea you like, close the book, and then try to write the idea as you understand it. Creating summaries is also a terrific way to prepare for essay tests. Writing a summary can help you recall the key events in a story. Most students find that when they read a textbook, it's helpful to stop at the end of each section and write a summary. This way, they don't feel overwhelmed by huge amounts of information. Let's talk about how to summarize. First, read the paragraph without highlighting or stopping too often to get the general gist. If you remember, in previous lessons, we said that the gist is similar to the main idea or an overall understanding of the text. Let's read and get the gist or the main point of this paragraph before we start summarizing it. 1917 was one of the most divisive elections in Canadian history. By the third year of World War I, the Canadian Army was running short of men. Much of Canada was in favor of conscription. They wanted to make it mandatory for young men to have to join the army. In contrast, people in Quebec were against the idea of conscription. This divide created a great deal of anger and frustration across Canada. Conservative politicians decided to run for election arguing for conscription, while Liberal politicians decided to run for election arguing against it. Both sides ran tough races. In the end, the Conservatives won, and young men were conscripted into the army. At home, the election further separated a Canada already divided by language and culture. After reading through this paragraph for the first time, we can try to get the gist of it. What's the main point? The gist or the main point of this paragraph seems to be that Canada had a very divisive election, an election that really divided the country, and a major issue was conscription. Like the paragraph says, conscription is when it's mandatory for young men to join the army. So Canada was divided on the idea of whether men should be forced to join the army. Now that we get the gist, let's reread it and highlight a few key words. If I were to highlight this paragraph, I notice that the word divide, divided, divisive repeat throughout and seems to be a key important idea. Also the idea of Canada running short of men and the fact that they wanted to make it mandatory for young men to join the army. It also notes that people in Quebec were against this idea of conscription. They were against the idea of forcing young men to join the army during the war. This might not be all of the information I need to understand the text, but it seems to be the main idea and several of the most important supporting details. Next, I have to find that specific main idea. If you remember back to previous lessons, there's a few ways to find the main idea. We could look for more of a general statement versus a specific one. We could look for key words such as several reasons or many types. Or we could decide on the topic and then find a statement that makes a point about that topic. In either case, we need to find the sentence that offers the author's main point, their main idea. The main idea in this paragraph would be the first sentence, that 1917 was one of the most divisive elections in Canadian history. It includes the topic, a divisive election, and seems to be the author's main point. The next step in summarizing is to cross out any specific descriptions, details, statistics. These would most likely be very minor, specific details that we wouldn't need if we're trying to summarize and condense the text to its overall meaning. Here are some specific details that we could omit or remove from our summary of this paragraph. First, the fact that it's the third year of World War I is very specific information. To have a general understanding or a summary of this, we wouldn't have to know that it was the third year of World War I. Our summary would also not require the definition of conscription, the fact that they wanted to make it mandatory for young men to have to join the army. As an entire paragraph, it's really nice that the author included this definition of conscription for us, but we most likely wouldn't need it in our summary of this paragraph. Likewise, it's fairly specific information that conservative politicians ran on the idea of conscription while liberal politicians ran against it. While this information is important to understand the issue on a historical level, in a brief summary, we wouldn't need to write exactly who was on which side. Now it's time to start writing our summary. We need to write one sentence that describes, in our own words, how the key words are connected to each other. Then we have to add one or two supporting sentences of important information. So here's our paragraph with our main idea as well as some key ideas highlighted. A good place to start is with the main idea. A good place to start is to take the main idea and to turn it into our own word. So their main idea says that 1917 was one of the most divisive elections in Canadian history. To put that into my own words, during World War I, an election divided Canada. Notice that's a little bit more generalized, and it's in my own words. Maybe I didn't include that it was specifically 1917, but by saying during World War I still have an understanding of when this happened. Now, I need to take one or two of the major, most important ideas from that paragraph and also put them into my own words. Like we discussed previously, at this stage, sometimes it's better not to go back to the paragraph while you're writing. Instead of going back and pulling out specific phrases and specific words that author has used, write your summary from your own memory, your own understanding of the text, and then go back to confirm that your summary is accurate. One major point in this paragraph is that some Canadians wanted to conscript young men to fight the war, while others didn't want to. Notice I haven't specifically said Quebec or Liberals or Conservatives. It's just important to understand that some Canadians wanted conscription while others didn't. Another important point is that those who wanted conscription won, and this further divided the country. At this point, notice that my summary is much shorter than the original. While the original was around 10 longer, complex sentences with lots of specific details, mine is much shorter, at 3 sentences. Finally, compare your first sentence to the first sentence in the paragraph. They shouldn't be the same. If you look at my first sentence, that during World War I, an election divided Canada, and the original first sentence, 1917 was one of the most divisive elections in Canadians' history, I've taken it and put it in my own words. At this point, I've written my summary, made sure that it's in my own words, and confirmed that I'm communicating the same thing as the original. Remember, a summary should be a short version of a longer original source. It includes only the most important ideas of the original text. Also, you should write the summary in your own words.